Be kind, or we'll shoot you and dance on your grave as your children weep. Now, as we have just tragically witnessed, this is a very fair reflection of the mindset of a substantial minority of the political left, a minority far too large now to be described as fringe. It includes mainstream journalists, commentators, academics, counsellors, and more. Much of the public need to now fundamentally reassess their conception of what the left is as the 20th century fades behind us. Generations are growing up, heavily indoctrinated by the state education system, to understand right-wing as a synonym for tyranny, wickedness, every kind of evil, and left-wing as a synonym for tolerance, compassion, liberty, and rainbows. This travesty of the historical record must not be tolerated any longer. Charlie Kirk's shooting was exceptionally shocking, a political assassination, all the more so precisely because he was not extreme. Kirk was a mainstream American conservative. His preferred method of resolving political differences was not the rifle, but the debate. That's what he spent his time doing, open debate, because he said without dialogue we will fall to violence. He was neither an ethno-nationalist, nor a neocon, nor an unstinting supporter of Israel, let alone a Nazi or a fascist, a white supremacist, or any of the repulsive smears thrown his way while his body was still warm. A truly appalling assassination of a young man, a husband, and a father to 2 children. However, the political left's reaction has, if anything, been even more shocking. And the public need to see this and understand that reaction. A man can be seen smiling and cheering just yards away at the shooting itself. This was his reaction to watching a man take a bullet through the neck. Messages like this, calling for the killing of more conservatives, were common all over X, formerly Twitter, and particularly on Blue Sky, the Twitter alternative for leftists who generally can't tolerate debate. On TikTok, a man happily showed his face, demanding that Nigel Farage be killed next. So, will he be sentenced to 3 years in prison like Lucy Connolly? I wouldn't hold your breath.
Fucking kill them all! Kill them all!
Don't stop with him. Don't let him be the end dog. Get rid of them all.
Ash Sarkar, that's the BBC's favourite communist, said, "I think Charlie Kirk died by the code that he lived by." Now that's a grotesque apology for murder. George Abariani said, quote, "Charlie Kirk got shot, let's fucking go." Now this man recently debated Charlie Kirk at the Oxford Union, and now he delights in his assassination. Even worse, this man is actually set to become the new Oxford Union president. Not only should it be unthinkable for such a man to be anywhere near the Oxford Union, a man who revels in the assassination of his political opponents, but it also came to light that he literally shouldn't be there, having only scored A, B and B in his A-levels. What was he doing at Oxford University when thousands with far better grades were turned down? In an earlier speech, this man, set to lead one of the most august debating chambers in the world, supported attacking institutions he disliked by any means necessary. In other words, with violence if needed. Femi, the jobless Remainer mascot, you're probably very familiar with him, complained that people were about to get real precious about the sanctity of one human life. Nels Abbey was invited onto Good Morning Britain, where he smeared Kirk as a
David Duke for the TikTok age. And I have some degree...
Can you just remind us who David Duke
was
is?
the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
baseless and deplorable slur on a murdered man. Bob Vyland, one of the BBC's favourite musicians, led his crowd in a delighted celebration of a man's murder.
Because if you chat shit, you will get banned! Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk, you piece of shit!
Extreme demonization of their opponents is standard practice for the political left, just as it was for Remain during the Brexit years. Indeed, David Lammy, the Deputy Prime Minister, claimed then that Tory MPs who wanted to leave the EU were worse than Nazis. Now, Lammy is a man whose intellect is about as modest as his moral judgment. He has never apologised for these sickening words, and has indeed been rewarded with some of the great offices of state. If you disagree with the left, you are a Nazi, a fascist, a racist, a white supremacist. You are a dangerous monster and should be treated as such. These are the moral waters in which assassinations spring from. These are deeply intolerant people. These are deeply illiberal people. And most of all, these are dangerous people, because their message is quite clear. People who disagree with them sit outside the moral bounds of society, and if their opponents are not stopped by any means necessary, dictatorship, death camps, and war would be next. Right on cue, Zoe Gardner, a hard-left open borders fanatic, adored by the mainstream British media, has released this video.
There's a darkness coming.
Along the Thames, woke this morning to find a giant banner draped across Tower Bridge. Complaints have been lodged, but there's no response from the government yet.
Some say woke, we say weakness. They call it diversity, we call it dilution. I fight for the British Defence League.
Liverpool and Birmingham are in flames tonight as masked BDL officers detain hundreds under the Home Security Act. Ministers say it's to protect so-called real Britons, but campaigners say people are vanishing without a trace.
We've got to show them Britain will never bow to fascism.
With AI depictions of the imminent fascist terror on the need to protest Trump's visit. It's not quite a call for violence, just a strong nod in that direction. Had the right released a mocked-up news report of Muslim gangs rampaging through a girls' school, well then the creators would be in prison as we speak. From around 2012 onwards, the Great Awakening, the ideas of the hard left permeated much of what was formerly known as the liberal left, to the point where they dominated not just the left, but our state institutions. The police, the judiciary, the armed forces, the media, the education system, and of course the universities. This will be the Long March. The liberal left in Britain is very much now simply the left. Note how rarely you hear the phrase student politics these days. It used to be a common pejorative, denoting a childish, somewhat self-indulgent, ignorant, simplistic outburst of anti-Western Marxist bile. You don't hear the phrase anymore because that is now not simply mainstream leftism, it is official state orthodoxy. It is an ideology that judges morality not on actions, but on which victims or oppressor groups a person belongs to. It views all human relations in terms of unequal power structures, all human interaction as conflict, and all differences of outcome as exploitation. So despite a mountain of evidence to the contrary, it is a religious belief of the left that all human beings are essentially identical and that all variances in outcome at a group level can only ever be due to discrimination and injustice, unless, of course, the disparity favours their preferred groups. Equality of outcome must be enforced with the mailed fist of the state. The brilliant must be made equal with the middling, the beautiful with the ugly, the obese with the Olympian, the clever with the stupid, and of course, the rich with the poor, the industrious with the indolent. This is where the attack on beauty comes from. The screeching rage at Sydney Sweeney, it is where fat positivity comes from, with obese models held up as healthy at any size. The hostility to IQ tests, to educational exams, all markers of differentiation. The dark underbelly of leftism is simply the revenge of the mediocre on the exceptional. As George Orwell observed, the left is motivated far more by a hatred of the rich than love for the poor. What applies to personal differences also applies to countries. Rich countries are exploiters, poor countries are exploited. The hatred of the West is not due to slavery or colonialism, both staples of human existence, but rather the West's extraordinary accomplishments, which are a blight on the leftist worldview of human equality, and a standing rebuke to the impoverished terror states created by communists. Bitterness and envy, draped in the garb of social justice, are easy bedfellows with violence. Theodore Dalrymple described sentimentality as the progenitor, the godparents, the midwife of brutality. And leftism drips with sentimentality, the triumph of public emotion, of performative virtue over judgment and reason. This sentimentality, this childish bullying parade of self-righteousness simply cannot survive the arena of debate, the realm of logic, fact and reality. Well, that was Charlie Kirk's arena. Where they failed with words, they succeeded with a bullet. And what is the historical record of leftist virtue? Now, were the Tories not such cowards, they might have addressed a long-standing failing of the education system, that it devotes enormous energies to the Nazi atrocities of the 20th century, quite rightly, while the majority of children still learn nothing whatsoever about communism and its dictators and its extraordinary crimes, its total disregard for human life, its war on human nature, on reality, on truth, a fanatical cull that killed 60 to 100 million people in the 20th century alone. Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, some of the very worst monsters in human history. How many of our school children could name a single one of them, much less their crimes? A few years ago, we at the New Culture Forum released a report in which young people aged 16 to 24 were asked who they would associate with crimes against humanity. A higher proportion chose Tony Blair than either Mao or Lenin. Thomas Sowell, America's leading black conservative thinker, writes of the fundamental contrast between left and right as competing visions of humanity. The right, like the Christian, adopts a tragic view of man fallen, muddling through as best we can and accepting the inevitable trade-offs of political decision-making. The left, by contrast, possess the vision of the anointed. Man is born perfect, it is society that fails him. To maintain this vision, of course, comforting lies are preferred to difficult truths. In this secular religion, heaven is an earthly pursuit. Your silence is violence, the left say. But their violence is virtue, their commitment to utopia, their intolerance of evil. It behoves everyone, on all sides, to understand and give serious thought to the dangers that lurk in the left's political worldview. But I would say that the days of indulging a narrative of the left as cuddly bears, overwhelmed by compassion, simply cannot be tolerated a day longer. Many of these people are violent, extreme, and bristling with hate, resentment, and intolerance. And the public and the media must now accept that reality.